She doesn't belong on the battlefield anymore. Someone as weak as her should stick to desk work. They sneered, words that once cut straight into Captain Olivia Hart's heart. After years of combat in the Middle East, she had been pushed into a media post at Fort Bliss, Texas, surrounded by press releases and quiet office cameras. Then, on a blistering afternoon, the radio crackled with a broken distress call, gunfire bleeding through from the Fillmore Canyon. But fate wasn't finished. An ambush erupted in the White Sands training area. As the desperate call came again from the Oregon mountains, two groups of American soldiers trapped under heavy fire. When every desperate glance searched for help that wasn't coming fast enough, Olivia stood up. In that moment, she was no longer the one behind the camera, but the only warrior willing to charge into the kill zone. Olivia Hart was remembered as a name that had long faded into the background. At Fort Bliss, among sun-drenched barracks and the low roar of helicopters, she was nothing more than the image of a veteran sitting behind a desk, editing reports and polishing internal news bulletins. Yet her past told a different story. Once a combat soldier in the U.S. Army, present in the fiercest campaigns in Iraq and Syria, Fallujah had left a wound on her shoulder that would never fully heal, along with a decision that forced her away from the front lines. At 36, Olivia's build was ordinary enough to be overlooked. 5'6", 128 pounds. Without the hulking physique or glittering medals to display. But the keen-eyed noticed. Each morning while the base still slept, she trained with iron-disciplined push-ups, rope climbs, pull-ups, every movement executed with the precision of her battlefield days. On the firing range, her bullets cut the air dead center into the target, so steady that many recruits turned their heads. Her recall of terrain and tactics was near flawless, a living map. Still, to her fellow soldiers, those qualities carried the label, old habits of a former soldier. In their eyes, Olivia's prime was over, her skills just relics of a past that no longer mattered. In tactical briefings, she sat at the edge of the table, listening, taking notes, delivering meticulous reports, but when missions began, she was never chosen for the assault team. She was communications logistics, not the kind of warrior who stepped into the kill zone. The whispers behind her back only deepened the divide. Too soft to stomach the smell of blood, better with a camera than a rifle. Such words stuck in her memory like barbed thorns, reminding her she'd been boxed into a role so safe it felt suffocating. Yet rather than fight back with noise, she stayed silent, storing every shard of strength within. Because Olivia knew the battlefield wasn't always out there, sometimes it came knocking right in the middle of the safe zone, and only those ready would survive. She trained not to prove anything to anyone, but so she would never betray herself. Amid the steady rhythm of life at Fort Bliss, no one imagined that one day, every skill they dismissed would become a lifeline for many. And when the summer sun poured fire over the Chihuahuan desert, fate began to shift. A sudden distress signal echoed from afar, a situation no one on base had been prepared for. Would Olivia remain on the sidelines, or was this the moment she would shatter every prejudice pressing down on her?
Welcome to Veteran Best Stories, where the war ends, but the stories live on. From the foxholes to front porches, we honor the silent battles our veterans still fight. Subscribe and walk with us beyond the battlefield.
That afternoon, the New Mexico sky felt sealed beneath a sheet of dry glass, the sun's heat slicing through every breath. At White Sands Missile Range, the thunder of artillery and live rounds from the 3rd Cavalry Regiment's training exercise rolled across the White Sand Valley. But within minutes, the air changed entirely. From the blurred southern horizon, an armed militia slipped across the border, blending into the dust and smoke of the live-fire drill. The official exercise ended, and the real nightmare began. A reconnaissance unit was cut off from the formation, their radio signal breaking apart in fragments. In another direction, several ridgelines away, a detachment from the 5th Special Forces Group was running a covert training scenario in the Oregon Mountains. They didn't yet know they had walked into a full ambush, with all communications to base severed. Every passing minute drew them closer to the edge of life and death. Back at Fort Bliss, the communications command room became a hive of chaos. Screens lit up with a tangle of warning signals, digital maps flickering with red blips moving erratically. Duty officers strained to maintain contact, but the distance and treacherous terrain meant reinforcements were hours away. In war, hours are more than enough for everything to end permanently. Olivia sat at the coordination desk, headset pressed tight, listening to each fragment of radio transmissions swallowed by wind and distant gunfire. The voice of a Special Forces sergeant cut through hoarse, broken from blood loss, only a few words audible. Then silence. In that moment, Olivia didn't just hear the sound, she saw the terrain in her mind. Every slope, every ravine, every pocket between boulder fields where echoes carried. She had been there before for months, training and memorizing every detail to survive. The familiarity surged through her like an electric current. No one in the room knew both danger zones as well as she did. But here, Olivia was only a communications officer. Her job was to relay information, not carry a weapon. Others would be sent in men whose map was nothing more than flat lines on a screen. The wall clock ticked in slow, deliberate beats, but to Olivia each strike was a gunshot cutting down the time left for those trapped out there. Heat flared in her veins, and battlefield memories came roaring back, not the shouts of victory, but the time she'd arrived too late, when only silence and the vacant faces of her comrades remained. She rose from her seat, moving quietly to the map table. The officers stayed locked on the shifting signals, arguing over options. No one noticed how her eyes had changed. In her mind, routes of approach aligned, invisible markers tagged possible ambush points, and a plan took shape faster than she could reach for a pen. This time, she wasn't going to sit and wait for the final report, because she knew if she let this moment pass, there would be no chance to reclaim all the years she'd been underestimated. The only question left was, would Olivia cross the line between support staff and lifesaver? And if she did, what would it cost her? All right, my dear audience, you're still with me, aren't you? Drop a 1 in the comments if you're hooked and want to hear what happens next. Not everyone has the courage to break a direct order, especially in the military, where discipline binds every action. But Olivia knew there were moments when obeying meant signing her comrades' death warrants. The image on the tactical display burned in her mind. 2 groups of American soldiers pressed into a narrow gap between a cliff wall and the valley floor. A sheer drop behind them. Enemy rifles hidden ahead. If they waited for reinforcements, time itself would become an invisible killer. She no longer heard the chatter around her, only her heartbeat, steady yet pounding, like a war drum. With deliberate movements, Olivia shrugged into a frayed-edge ballistic vest, slung a heavy medical pack over her shoulder, and gripped her M4A1, the weapon she had quietly maintained like a sacred ritual, even after years of being barred from the battlefield. Her teammates' stunned eyes followed her as she turned toward the door. They knew she was doing what no one else dared, and they also knew no one could stop her. Once Olivia decided, she was a storm. Before leaving the room, she left the duty officer with one short sentence heavy as a command. They don't need a report. They need someone there now. The MRZR's engine roared under her hands as it tore across the gravel trails of the New Mexico desert. Afternoon sunlight poured in gold streaks over the parched landscape. Desert wind whipped her face, and sand streamed into the gaps of her helmet, But Olivia didn't blink. Her memory, sharpened by hundreds of hours of training, painted every bend, every incline, every rock outcropping where she could hide if she had to. The Organ Mountains were a maze of stone and shadow. For strangers, it was a doorway to a silent death. For Olivia, it was an old diary written in sweat, blood, and sleepless nights. Every ridge she crested brought back nights of marching under the moon, when her breath curled white in the cold wind, and the grind of sand under her boots ticked down the seconds of a life-or-death mission. Near the danger zone, she slowed, killed the lights, and let the engine idle low in the fading light. From far off came a few short bursts of gunfire, tight, urgent, signaling the firefight had reached its peak. Olivia eased the vehicle beside a massive boulder, checked her magazines, and tightened the straps on her medical pack. One deep breath, and she slid to the ground, moving in silence like a shadow. She took the long way around, climbing along a narrow mountainside where jagged rock faces were just high enough to hide her profile. Every step was a calculation of weight, sound, and distance, a skill no satellite map or rescue team could duplicate. When she reached a vantage point over the valley, she realized the situation was worse than she'd imagined. The recon team was cornered in a dead-end pocket, and the Special Forces detachment was split in two, one half wounded and pinned behind a rock, the other returning fire with dwindling strength. In that moment, Olivia understood. She had one chance to cut into the chaos, deliver bandages and ammo to the right hands at the right time. Everything else, including her own life, came after that. And as she slid down the slope into the haze of smoke and grit, one quiet question rang like a bell in her head. Would this return save them, or erase Olivia's name from the records forever? The gunfire echoing from Fillmore Canyon struck like hammers against bone, relentless and merciless. Each shot was a reminder that time was shrinking, that every passing second was another chance slipping away for the men pinned under enemy fire. Through her binoculars, Olivia saw the chaos clearly. The Special Forces team trapped in a dead corner, with nowhere left to fall back. Two men lay motionless in dark pools of blood, while the remaining three fought desperately, returning fire and using bare hands to stem the bleeding of their wounded. Above them, more than a dozen enemy shooters held the high ground, their positions locked on the trapped soldiers like predators with prey in their sights. But Olivia didn't charge in blindly. Combat experience had taught her that reckless moves only added to the casualty count. She slipped deeper into a rock crevice, switched to a secure military radio frequency, and called in the artillery at Donna Ana range. Her voice was low, clipped, and absolute, the kind of order that left no room for debate, and she relayed target coordinates accurate to the meter. Few knew a communications officer like her could work with such precision. It was a skill carried over from years spent embedded with frontline units. The artillery answered almost immediately. Shells screamed through the air, detonating against the mountainsides, shaking the earth beneath her. Sand and stone exploded upward, and smoke blanketed the enemy's line of sight. Within seconds, their firing positions fell into disorder, their fire scattered, and that was the opening Olivia had been waiting for. She swung around onto an old, nearly forgotten trail, known only to those who had camped or patrolled there for years. The slope was steep, narrow, and slick, but Olivia moved as if the path had been carved into her memory. Every step was a calculation of time. A moment too slow could mean death. A moment too fast could mean exposure. Closing in on the trapped unit, Olivia burst from between the rocks like an arrow, drawing startled looks from the soldiers holding their line. Without asking questions, she dropped to her knees beside the most critically wounded. His shirt was soaked through with blood, his face pale to the edge of gray. One glance told her everything: shattered pelvis, high risk of rapid blood loss. The second casualty, just a few steps away, gasped for breath, each exhale bubbling a clear sign of a punctured lung. Shutting emotion out, Olivia worked like a machine programmed for moments like this. She signaled the remaining 3 soldiers to set up overlapping fields of fire for cover. With one hand, she wrapped a pressure bandage, stabilizing the injury with whatever material she had in her medical pack. Then, without hesitation, she bent and heaved the 90-kilogram soldier onto her shoulders. The weight crushed into her spine and squeezed every breath, but her muscles had long been conditioned for this burden in years of punishing training. She chose to extract along the southern trail, dangerous, but less prone to ambush. Her boots pounded against the dirt, the crack of gunfire still snapping behind her, each heartbeat thundering like a war drum, urging her forward. Sweat and desert dust turned to briny grit on her lips, but Olivia never slowed. Every meter gained was another step away from the kill zone. As their figures slipped into the shadow of the mountains, the echoes of explosions still rolled across the canyon, mingling with the cold hiss of the wind. In that moment, Olivia knew she had crossed a line no one could return from unchanged. And a quiet question seeped into her thoughts. Would this rescue be only the beginning of a larger battle still waiting ahead? Now, back to the heart of the story. Take a deep breath before we continue. Pause for a second to hit subscribe or drop a comment with your location and the time you're watching. I'm glad to have you alongside for every step of this journey. From the base of Fillmore Canyon to the helicopter landing zone was barely 800 meters, yet to Olivia, it was longer than any journey she had ever taken. Ahead lay an open stretch, stripped bare under a blinding sun, no tree, no boulder, large enough to shield them from the rain of gunfire sweeping across it. Every step forward was a gamble with death. Olivia took point, body low, moving in short bursts. She picked each temporary cover carefully, firing short, precise bursts that forced the enemy's heads down, carving out brief windows for the wounded to cross. The air was thick with the acrid bite of gunpowder, and the heat of spent rounds mingled with the copper scent of fresh blood seeping from makeshift stretchers. 200 meters from the LZ, a sharp, dry crack split the air, and Olivia felt her left shoulder tear open. The impact staggered her, her breath catching in her throat, but battlefield instinct shoved the pain aside. Stopping meant death for the men she was shielding, and for herself. She refused to slow, shifting her rifle to her right hand, firing off balance yet still sharp enough to keep the enemy pinned. The 3 wounded behind her couldn't move on their own. Gritting her teeth, Olivia hoisted 2 of them onto her shoulders like sacks of living sand, their weight crashing down on her injured side until her vision blurred. The third, his legs nearly useless, she kept at her hip, his arms slung over her remaining shoulder. The 4 of them clung together as one mass, moving through the storm of rounds ripping the air, bullets punching into the dirt around them with needle-sting fury. Stone and dust exploded under suppressive fire from the ridges above. Every time she lifted her foot, hot grit and rock fragments lashed her face, but she didn't turn back, didn't glance over her shoulder. Ahead, the LZ emerged a ragged patch of earth scarred by earlier shelling, now drowned in the rotor thunder of a UH-60 Black Hawk drive opping in. The rotor wash struck them like a whip, blasting sand into a choking haze. The helicopter shuddered violently as the pilot held it low, giving the medics just seconds to leap out and sprint toward them. Olivia didn't slow, even as every step drove a knife deeper into her shoulder. Only when a medic's hands gripped her and dragged the wounded away did she allow herself a heartbeat's pause. But instead of stepping straight onto the bird, Olivia turned back, rifle raised toward the canyon mouth, laying down suppressive fire until the last Special Forces soldier was aboard. Only when the door slammed shut, the engine roared, and the Black Hawk lifted free did she let the weapon fall from her hands, her left shoulder trembling under the weight of blood-soaked fabric. From above, Fillmore Canyon shrank into a dark scar beneath the blazing Sunday. The ache in her body mingled with something else, the quiet certainty that, at least today, no one had been left behind. And somewhere deep inside her, the initial haze faded, and Olivia awoke in the pale light of Fort Bliss's field hospital, the steady beep of a heart monitor echoing like a distant drum. White bandages wrapped her left shoulder and arm, each breath searing the wound, but what anchored her to reality wasn't the pain. It was the faces she'd seen make it out of Fillmore Canyon alive. In that moment, she knew she'd traded a part of herself to protect something far greater: lives and trust between soldiers. News of the rapid extraction and Olivia's daring actions spread through the unit like wildfire. Barracks hallways buzzed with talk of the former communications veteran who had crossed open ground under fire to shield a group of wounded. The base command initially opened an investigation for leaving her assigned post, a charge that could end any military career. But when the Special Forces team's report came in, each line confirmed it. Without Olivia, at least 2 men would not have returned. The investigation closed, and the outcome turned her life onto a new path. Olivia was awarded the Bronze Star with Valor, a medal reserved for those who display extraordinary bravery under fire. The ceremony was simple, without speeches, but the eyes of the soldiers around her said it all. True respect needs no fanfare. As her injury healed, Olivia received an unexpected offer to train new Special Forces units in survival tactics. No longer on the sidelines, she stepped into the role of warrior instructor, passing on lessons paid for in blood and time. On the training grounds, she taught more than stealth or accuracy. She taught what couldn't be measured: calm in chaos, resolve when everything collapses, and the unbreakable duty to leave no one behind. A year later, Olivia returned to the battlefield, not to pull a trigger, but to sit at the planning table. Maps spread wide, her finger traced escape routes, defensive positions, and critical timings for suppressive fire. During hostage rescues, her voice carried the weight of someone who had run through a kill zone and come back. Each successful mission proved that battlefield experience, when shared the right way, could save more lives than any bullet. Over time, Olivia's story became legend at Fort Bliss. Recruits whispered about the advisor who dragged 3 men across open ground in a rain of gunfire, while veterans nodded at her name as if to say, strength isn't about muscle, rank, or medals. It's about the moment you decide not to stand still when your comrades need you. From a communications veteran once dismissed, Olivia Hart became the symbol of the base, the one they called when a situation broke the rule book. And to her, it was never a story about glory, it was about duty. About living in a way that honored those who never made it back. Some battlefield stories aren't just about bullets and explosions, but about decisions made in the thin line between life and death. Olivia Hart's story reminds us that true courage isn't the absence of fear, it's feeling the fear and moving forward anyway for someone else. It's choosing to place the lives of others above your own safety and accepting the cost to keep your oath. That lesson isn't just for those in uniform. In everyday life, each of us has our own Fillmore Canyon situations where we must decide, watch, or act, stay silent, or speak out, retreat, or step forward. And that choice defines who we are. If this story resonates with you, leave a comment below. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between your own safety and the good of someone else? What did you decide? Share your thoughts, or tag a friend in the US who you believe needs to hear this story today.